I'm Steve Hollingworth. I'm very fortunate to be the president of Grameen Foundation. Just a few, brief words about Grameen. Many of you will know, of course, the experience of Professor Muhammad Yunus and the Grameen Bank and the innovation of setting up kind of the whole notion of micro-lending to very poor women. We're very proud to be the international arm of the Grameen movement. We work in countries other than Bangladesh, but very much under the tutelage of Professor Yunus, in particular trying to find ways of creating sustainable social enterprises that continue to benefit the poor. That's our main focus. The early days, we're 20 years old. The early days of Grameen Foundation, we essentially were a replicator of Grameen Bank methodology. We assisted about 400 microfinance banks globally to establish themselves and to thrive. And I'm going to say a little bit about where that industry is now. But over the last 10 years or so, essentially our main focus has been how the payments platforms that are developing in the developing world are a channel for financial inclusion, particularly for very poor women, and how data is really the grease to make better decisions about lending, about selling, about sourcing, about the kind of technical support that poor people particularly women, require. So that's really us. Let me go through what I'm going to say. All of you probably are very aware of the fact that about 1.1 billion women globally are unbanked. There's about 1.7 globally who are unbanked totally, but 1.1 billion are women. And without access to formal financial services, of course, there's a huge wasted opportunity for all of us. Not only in terms of economic development in countries, but also in terms of just overall well-being and safety and security. So financial inclusion actually has a tremendous impact on poor women. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the changing circumstances that we're trying to work with to expand financial inclusion. The microfinance movement, as I mentioned, really was one of the key examples globally about how a pro-poor financial service, about how a pro-poor business could become a sustainable industry. And there have been many challenges in that industry. You know, I often say that mixing a moral outcome with a market economy is a challenge, right? So, there have been criticisms of microfinance in terms of the ability, of women to receive and repay loans, some of the competitiveness or the client kind of protection requirements have not always been there. And there's been a lot of concern about profitability and some of the profits that have been realized in microfinance. But having said all that, microfinance has very strong evidence of showing that loans do help the rural poor grow their enterprises. It helps them expand their working capital. It helps very poor women get access to savings that are particularly important for income smoothing and for access to education and health for their families. And that really, at the end of the day, probably one of the biggest benefits is the empowerment that women have by being able to be active decision makers in their families and in their communities and to elevate their own personal status in both of those environments. Microfinance has scaled significantly, little known, but in the 1980s, when I was a mere master's degree student, there were about 8 million clients of microfinance. Right as of 2010, there are about 3,600 MFIs serving in excess of 200 million poor clients, with about $230 billion of assets under management. So despite the criticism, actually by taking it out of strictly a charitable or an aid realm, it's scaled very, very significantly. Now, I believe, and we believe at the Grameen Foundation, that what's happening with digital technology and the rise of mobile money platforms, even in some of the poorest regions of the world, is really creating an unprecedented opportunity for reaching very poor clients at a pace much quicker than microfinance did over the 30-year period that I described. At the heart of the change is that microfinance really was based on one key insight, and this is really to the credit of Muhammad Yunus. And that was, the data point was, did other women in the village trust the woman enough who was taking out the loan? Was her character enough collateral? Would they undertake to repay the loan on her behalf if she did not? Right? That was the one data point that this $230 billion industry that serves the poor was based on, and it has proved highly successful. But now we're actually facing a period where a whole array of data and information that we can derive about the poor and we can distribute to the poor, including the trust she enjoys from her neighbors, is really an expanded data set that we can use to understand the needs and the opportunities that poor people have. So this creates the opportunity of providing the right information, the right access to market and supplies, and the right kind of financial service at the right time. And frankly, I've worked in development for 30 plus years. We've never had this power before. The number of times I jokingly say that I filled in paper surveys, I put them in paper folders, they stuck on a shelf somewhere. We never had the ability to understand the segmentation of that database. We never had the ability to follow up systematically to provide timely information and support. But that's really what's changing in a very, very big way. I want to talk a little bit about the work that we do. This is Sindhu, and Sindhu lives in India. She's from Nagpur district in Maharashtra state. She's with her husband and her daughter, who's 4 years old. Her husband's a welder, and he had very inconsistent income. And the whole family was living on just about $2.70 a day, largely from income that she earned by cleaning houses. And one day, Sindhu's husband attended a meeting organized by my group in India that asked for volunteers who might be interested in being trained in using digital technology, mobile phones, and helping other women in her community to become financially literate, particularly through the use of mobile phones. And Sindhu's husband raised his hand and said, I'd like my wife to do this. I'd like to point that out because men are good many times, right? And Sindhu took training for 15 days. She gained a lot of confidence and skills. She learned how to use a smartphone, and she learned how to use a biometric device. And I'll show that in a little bit, that basically helps to confirm the identity of her neighbors and open up financial services for them. And she learned a lot of soft skills about how to communicate with her neighbors. She was finally certified as a Grameen Mitra, which means a friend of the village. And she goes door to door to help other women understand how they can access loans, commit to savings, pay bills, repay loans, withdraw money, access government services such as pensions and other things. So she faced a lot of obstacles in the beginning. She's a lower caste member of society in India. And when she went door to door, she was finding she was being rejected. She eventually went to the Sarpanch, who's a locally elected official in her community, and said, I'm having this trouble. You want me to do this service? Please help me. And the Sarpanch and her devised a plan. They got on a motorbike together and they went around together saying that this service is available, and the doors opened up. Interest happened. And her life became easier, and she began providing a huge service. Now we have about 200 mitras in India, and they serve in excess of about 300,000 people. In the first year of transactions, there was in excess of $12 million of transactions from this small community in the districts where we serve. But it provides a whole range of services, and she manages liquidity to be not only the village ATM, but also the village broker. And she eventually also got involved in a sideline, which was essentially selling and distributing clean water in her community, and she ended up employing her husband to do that. So she is very, very proud of what she does. This is an example of, the kind of service that she can provide anywhere in her community. She can go door to door. She does go door to door, helping people pay their bills or figure out how to access government payments. And one of the really big features is related to the whole India Stack effort going on in India, the universal ID system, Aadhaar it's called. She can actually biometrically identify clients and prove them. India opened up about 500 or 600 million bank accounts linked to this biometric identification. And it's really, I'm going to talk a little bit at the end of the session about how the Indian Stack is such an important development for what we do in development. But she essentially is at the base end of ensuring that a whole range of financial services are opening up to her community. Now, we've been able to do this in other communities in the Philippines. This is a woman called Joan Sorogon. She's 36. She has 3 children, She runs what's called a Sari Stari store in a place called Daga in Iloilo. We've had an extremely successful program in India. It's called the Community Agent Network. And at the moment, we have over 4,500 community agents. And some of them, including Joan, offer as many as 200 different financial products on that point-of-sale device right there. We were staggered, frankly, in the first year of operations. The amount of transactions going through the community agent network was in excess of $24 million in the first year and a half. And then finally, this works in refugee camps too. This is work that we do in a camp in northern Uganda called Bidi Bidi Camp, and this is a woman called Desire, which I think is a very appropriate name, refugee from South Sudan. And what we've learned in refugee camps is a lot of times there's physical restrictions on refugees and their ability to move and seek employment or develop, commercial ties outside of the camp. But mobile money is actually a way of inserting liquidity within a camp and creating a local economy that begins to employ people and support them. So we're very proud of the fact that between Uganda, Indonesia, Philippines, and India, we've established more than 80,000 community agents who provide these types of payment platform supports. As I say, they go from an ATM to a community broker. The other, this is just a little bit of an example of the kind of solutions that are there. We can work with multiple mobile providers. In Philippines, for example, there are 8 mobile providers that we work with. They're not interoperable. And so our point-of-sale device actually helps to reconcile the transactions across it. We're able to assist the agents and train them. We have a number of training platforms. In India, we use something called G-Leap, which essentially is a mobile and web-based training platform to train the agents about how to do their work. It requires limited connectivity. Generally, the software that we use can be synced once there is connectivity. We can offer receipts. We can. There's no need to pre-register. You don't need to be like a permanent client to go to one of our agents. And then they're physically very, very portable. So that's our work with we call it female agent networks, right? Now, the second area that I want to talk about that I think is very, very relevant for what's happening with data globally is really agriculture. 70% of our world's food is produced by smallholder farmers, right? These are farmers that are producing on land than less than about 4 acres. And there is an increasingly vulnerable situation that smallholder farmers are facing globally, right? And it's a variety of factors, not the least of which climate change, right? But also fluctuations in prices, the difficulties with pests and disease, right, and limited extension and input opportunities. If you're a smallholder farmer in the developing world and you are reliant on rain-fed agriculture, you're in a very difficult situation, right? And increasingly so with changes in temperature and rainfall patterns, right? But one of the things that we're finding is that the availability of data, of digitized data, is actually opening up opportunities to understand in much more depth the adoption of practices, the farm economics of farmers, and to use that data to structure how individual support to them is delivered. So the features of digitization about being able to personalize, customize, scale, and then iterate, right, are extremely valuable in terms of applying artificial intelligence and data, to solve problems that smallholder farmers face. This is Joyce Mwangani. She's a farmer in Kenya. She has 4 children. She grows food crops and she rears chickens, goats, and she has 1 cow. Right. She was forced to leave school at the age at 4th grade, and she has limited literacy, limited training in agriculture, and she had very little money to actually invest in her agriculture. But she was determined to do more, right? And one of the things that we did, well, first of all, it's important to understand in Kenya, 75% of the population makes its living off of agriculture, and the sector accounts for about 24% of GDP, but only 4% of the country's total credit is channeled into agriculture. So this is, pretty much the kind of the terms of reference that you would find almost anywhere in the world. Grameen Foundation, we were able to partner with a group in Kenya called Musoni. Musoni is a all-digital microfinance institution that we are very proudly one of the founders, one of the initial investors in. And we helped them design a loan portfolio specifically for smallholder farmers. It's called Kilimo Booster. Kilimo means agriculture, so boosting agriculture. And frankly, it was a breakthrough because farmers were able to apply digitally for their loan, working with an agent. They're able to repay their loan over mobile phones. They're able to have a very quick turnaround time, about 24 hours, in terms of getting access to their loan. And the loan is able to be based on realistic data about their farm activities and their farm economics, right? And so this really, combining that facility of a loan with agricultural extension advice, with support from her farmer group, really was critical in helping her elevate her milk production from her dairy cow from around 1 liter a day to over 10. And so that had the opportunity of expanding her living 10 times, from about $2.50 a day to upwards to, $20 a day. And we're very proud of the fact that Musoni has distributed about 36,000 loans, and 56% of them are aimed at women. So one of the keys to this effort is really kind of captured on this slide, right? The determining factor for us is around a farmer profile, is managing data around the actual information about the farmer herself or himself, right? And it would first of all involve observable adoption of activities. A farmer, a dairy farmer, a cocoa farmer, a coconut farmer, a maize farmer, there are prescribed activities throughout the agricultural cycle that they should do: fertilizing, weeding, intercropping, agroforestry techniques, whatever the crop is. And we're able to negotiate with the farmer what activities need to be done at what times. And the field agent is able digitally to report whether or not those activities have been carried out. So that's a very important data point. The second one is we're able to work with the farmer to understand the sensitivity of their input and output on their farm. So, we can sit with the farmer and model for them, with the types of inputs that they plan to put in, what kinds of outputs that they can expect. Understanding that farmers have different risk profiles, ability to commit labor and cash to their work. And that becomes another data point to follow too. How actively are they able to complete their financial plan that they wanted to carry out? And then, it all arrives at an agreement with the farmer and a plan to continue and coach and monitor. One of the things that we've also started to do now, particularly in Ghana, with the support of the Dutch Space Agency, it's all about chocolate, right? Is to use satellite and drone imagery on cocoa production as a way of verifying and seeing whether or not we still need to continue to collect observable data on top of it. So when it's mentioned, in the plenary that we're looking at the Internet of Things coming our way, it's already happening in a big way. So since our founding, we've been very, very fortunate at Grameen Foundation to work with in excess of 25 million people. We also have, I think, apart from our work strictly in agriculture, a customer relations management, licensing, and professional service enterprise that was a project of Grameen Foundation. It's called TaraWorks. But TaraWorks essentially is a way for users of payment platforms, particularly in East Africa, where M-Pesa is so big, who are integrating it into their business model, can create applications that are useful to their clients and to their field workers, and monitoring the performance of field workers and monitoring the requirements of their clients. And TaraWorks now works with right around 97 different social enterprises and businesses in East Africa. It essentially is a way for managers of enterprises to have very active oversight of all of their operations. It works with pay-as-you-go solar companies. It works with animal digester, methane gas and fertilizer producers. It works with fast-moving consumer items. It works, of course, in the financial services sector. And we're very proud of the fact that Tara Works on its own works in about 39 countries and has in excess of about 6 million direct clients using it. And it's a great example of kind of the aspiration that Professor Yunus sets for us to take something as a project and figure out the client and the business case to actually make as a sustainable enterprise. And it's actually what we're currently doing with both of our work in the Philippines and in India with the female agent networks. We were very successful with a group in Indonesia called PT Rumah, which was our first experiment of expanding a female agent network. And that became a highly successful enterprise that was recently sold to a group called Gojek. One of the things that we feel very strongly about is all of these opportunities opening up, and I think it's known the kind of the hockey stick change curve that's happening globally, but we're particularly interested in what digitization and mobile money platforms can do in Africa. In 1998, there were about 2 million subscribers to mobile phone accounts, and we're all in Africa, and we're all estimating that by 2020 there's going to be about 725 million users of mobile phones. So that is quite a trajectory. As I mentioned, there's still a lot of work to do. There are 1.7 billion unserved poor by financial institutions. There's 900 million people who are still chronically poor, living on less than that $2.25 a day mark. But we feel that there are unprecedented opportunities to continue to overcome the issues of poverty and hunger. The first, of course, is we literally are on the cusp of beginning to use digital technology and data-derived information to make better decisions about how the poor can be helped and what opportunities can be open to them, but more importantly, what opportunities they can decide on, right? And then secondly, we feel very strongly that it's critical that this continues to be taken out of just an aid realm, and that it really looks at economic sustainability. It looks at how, by strengthening organizations and improving efficiency and sustainability, these models are scaled and they continue to reach very poor clients. And then finally, and this is a bigger issue that was covered in some of the plenary, we're in the middle of like this global debate on paradigms of data, right? You can tell I'm American. In the U.S., it's essentially data as a commodity, right? That I have very little say over. GDPR in Europe is really a reaction to that. China, of course, very state-led, and there are a lot of concerns all around about what that means. But on one side, they are actually using data to benefit some of their 20 million farmers through a national fertilizer database, and they're understanding what's happening with yields and how they can lift yields and what parts of the country are underserved with fertilizer. So, we can all say what we like about problems, which there are plenty, but there are people thinking, I think, specifically about how data can be used to solve some problems that very poor people face. The example I really take to heart, and I was very fortunate, I lived for 5 years in India, 13 years in South Asia, so I know that environment well. But the example I take to heart is what India is doing. Probably about 3 foreign affairs magazines ago, there was a great article about what India is doing with their digital economy by a gentleman called Nandan Nilekani, who is the chair of the Unique Identification Authority and also Infosys, right? And essentially, India is creating what they call India Stack. It has different layers to it. The base of it is the unique ID, and that's Aadhaar, right? And Aadhaar is a Hindi word; it means foundation. And when you saw Sindhu giving the fingerprint, that's the base of it. She's able to prove the identification of that person. It's also good that she knows her community and she can say, but she's able to prove the ID of that poor woman. And that opens up the stack to that woman. It opens up a bank account access. It opens up any government payments that she's entitled to. And it's going to begin to open up other areas too. But essentially in India, the way I try to describe it is they're trying to use a common identification and common database for two principles. One is anonymized data, right, which they aspire to have, to be able to tell and to dictate national priorities about where's poverty, where's poor health, where's lack of financial services, where is there need for better education infrastructure, anonymized, right? So it becomes a planning tool. Very interesting. And on the second side, what they're doing is setting up what they call data fiduciaries, and they're banks of data that I can voluntarily enter, and I can say you can use my personal data, and then that fiduciary is able to sell it to Coke or Pepsi or whoever wants to buy it. And I can say I want to sell it to Coke or I don't want to sell it to Coke, right? And I can have control over where it goes to, and then eventually I'm going to get paid for my data, right? If it's used that way, right? So I think in what I have seen in different parts of the world around data and data management, India is worth taking a look at. There are, I think, many exciting opportunities that are opening up, and I can't emphasize enough that I've been working in development a very long time. This power of data and information is truly a game changer, and figuring out how this digital economy transition, the Internet of Things, how that creates the power, to unleash this really untapped potential that the poorest people on Earth have continued to display, I think is really transformative for us. And it's related not only to ID and et cetera, but data extraction, analytics, new contractual forms for better monitoring supply chains or services that go, this whole opportunity of personalization, customization, scale, iteration. These things are very big deals, I think, for our world. So I hope that continues to be a major priority of all of us thinking about what's happening with payments and the use of data. And I'm very grateful to be able to work in this sector and to apply some of these exciting new tools to our work. So thank you very much. Is that questions? Nobody's here guiding me. Right. If you guys have questions, I'm happy to take them. If you want to go to lunch, I'm happy to do that too. Right. Go ahead.
What is the cost of this operation?
I'm sorry?
What is the cost of
The cost. Yeah, right. Thank you. We're a not-for-profit. We're a philanthropic effort and activity. So a 501c3, in U.S. terms. So we have a variety of sources. We have some donors. People give us monthly donations. We have some large net worth individuals who give us donations. We work with groups. I'm here, talking with people like MasterCard Foundation and, DFID, et cetera, the British government. We're also fortunate, and we think that's very important as we advance a project into an enterprise. We do have some small funds. We have, about $4 million, $5 million of investment capital that we're able to put into some of these fledgling, enterprises. We do that largely to learn things, like with the example of Musoni. We wanted to learn with them how to use farmer data better. So that's why we became a key partner. So it's a variety of sources. Sure.
Are those loans interested loans?
Yes, they're interested. Yes, right.
Any idea of the interest?
It varies by country, but it will be anywhere from 8 to 18, 20% annual. Yep.
What ways are different nonprofits to overcome the accessibility issue? It seems like a lot of this breaks down when either a phone or the internet is not available, and how can you be overcoming that? I know there's some use cases around like drop call marketing and using that for signups.
Right.
Is there any other that you're
Yeah.
aware of?
And the advent of connectivity, of course, is astronomical, for one thing. I mean, if you look like on a 4 or 5 year scale in Africa or South Asia, connectivity has just expanded tremendously. The main way we get around it is particularly for field workers who are data collectors and have to enter data into a larger database like TaraWorks or like our farm development plan. Basically is the ability to register the data on the device and then sync it once they get to a Wi-Fi enabled area. That's generally the way we work around it. Yep. Great, thank you very much. Real pleasure to talk with you.